Everyone thought it was a joke, a bony, frail horse collapsing to its knees as the room erupted in laughter. But then a young man stood up, quietly walked forward, and said, "I'll take him." No one understood why. They couldn't see what he saw in the horse's eyes, a soul that had never been trusted. And that moment marked the beginning of a story no one could have imagined. The entire hall was bathed in blinding white halogen lights. Scoffing laughter and murmured whispers, laced with the scent of bourbon and expensive perfume, mingled thick in the air. The Red Bluff auction house in Wyoming wasn't a place for the weak, and certainly not for creatures deemed worthless. Inside the ring, bordered by worn wooden rails, lay a Mustang, collapsed and motionless. Its body was all bones and scars, its dark brown coat a patchwork of old wounds, like relics from a war it never asked to fight. Its eyes were half shut, ears drooping, legs trembling, though it didn't move. It wasn't dead, yet everyone looked at it like it might as well be. Ladies and gentlemen, what we have here is a purebred Mustang. Who'll start the bidding? The auctioneer's voice rang out, high and thin, tinged with desperation. Silence. A blonde woman draped in fur chuckled and turned to the man beside her, loud enough for half the row to hear. Heavens, I thought it was a breathing sandbag. Laughter rippled like a wave. An old cowboy pulled his hat low, spat into an empty beer can, and muttered, "Things just taking up stall space." "Can I start at $5?" someone hollered through a chuckle. The host tried to laugh along, but his voice began to crack. "This is a breed that once roamed wild in the Powder River Basin, folks. Power, loyalty, the spirit of freedom." But no one listened. Their eyes had already moved down the catalog to the next lots. Thick-muscled horses, coats polished to a shine, microchipped and market-ready. Then, a sharp scraping sound cut through the din as a chair dragged against the concrete floor. A young man stood up from the back row. Worn flannel shirt, faded ball cap, boots caked with red dirt. He looked out of place, too young, too quiet for this crowd. "I'll take him." His voice wasn't loud, but it sliced clean through the noise. All eyes turned. "Come again?" A man in an Armani suit raised an eyebrow, leaning in. "I said I'll buy him." The young man repeated, eyes locked on the horse. The hall erupted into gasps and mocking laughter. "Kid's lost his damn mind. That corpse?" But the young man didn't flinch. He stepped toward the railing and held out a check to the manager. No bargaining, no questions, just a simple statement. "I'll sign it, and I'll be taking him now." His name was Chase Landon, 24 years old. A mobile farrier by trade, one of the few left in Wyoming. It was the kind of work you took if you preferred solitude and had nothing tying you down. Chase had traveled with his father, fixing hooves from town to town, until the old man was killed in a rodeo accident last year. Since then, Chase had withdrawn to a beat-up trailer parked along the Rock Creek Ridge, where wind and snow were his only company. And now, he was bringing home a soul the world had already given up on. He named the horse Coal Dust, for the deep black in its eyes, eyes that held a sorrow as old and heavy as ash, as if it had seen all the worst of mankind and still somehow survived it. Morning in Rock Creek was still cold, even with spring just beginning to stir. The snow hadn't fully melted, leaving patchy puddles along the red dirt road that led to the small farm Chase had rented from a widowed old man, now living with his daughter up in Idaho. The farm had only a small wooden horse stall, 2 sagging barns, and a cramped loft house where Chase lived alone. No landline, no cell service, just the wind, the pine-covered hills, and the never-sleeping hum of nature. Coal Dust arrived on a drizzly afternoon. Chase led him gently off the trailer, draping a dark blanket over his back and guiding him toward the stall. The fresh hoofprints pressed into the mud seemed to mark the start of something neither of them fully understood. Each morning, Chase rose before the sun crested the eastern range. He brewed black coffee, pulled on his weathered coat, slipped into rubber boots patched with wooden nails, and walked to the stall, moving slowly like he was afraid to disturb something fragile. Coal Dust didn't change, still silent, still withdrawn. He wouldn't lift his head when Chase called his name, but Chase didn't give up. Day after day, he sat just outside the stall, reading short passages from The Old Man and the Sea, or talking out loud like he was speaking to himself. Simple stories, simple presence. One morning, Chase stepped a little closer. In his hand was his father's old lead rope. He didn't loop it over Coal Dust's head, just rested it gently in his palm and held it out, an unspoken invitation. The horse stared at the rope, then turned away. Chase said nothing. He folded the rope, placed it on the step, and sat back down quietly. A week later, he tried again. But this time, when the rope brushed against the horse's neck, Coal Dust startled, rearing back with a terrified whinny, crashing through the fragile stall door and vanishing into the open field like a ghost let loose. Chase froze. His heart pounded. But he didn't chase after him. He knew that if he ran, the horse would only run farther. He walked instead, quietly tracking the hoofprints through the soft earth, looping around the sparse woods behind the farm. Each step heavy, not from fatigue, but from the voice in his head whispering, "You ruined it. You ruined everything." 3 hours later, he found Coal Dust standing motionless by the creek, shoulders trembling with every breath, white foam gathering at the corners of his mouth. The horse didn't bolt. It was exhausted, but its eyes still flickered with fear. Chase didn't approach. He just stood there a few feet away and said softly, "I'm not asking you to trust me. I just don't want you to die out here alone." He sat down after a while, leaning against a cottonwood tree, waiting. Rain began to fall lightly. The wind turned colder. Still he didn't move. Eventually, Coal Dust turned his head. Slowly, quietly, step by step, he walked toward Chase. Not because he trusted him, but because he had no strength left to run. But the reason didn't matter. It was the first time he had chosen to come closer. The next morning, as Chase led him back to the stall, a few neighbors watched from the fence line. An elderly woman shook her head. "That horse'll kill that boy someday." A middle-aged man lit a cigarette and sneered. "He's just bringing trouble home." Chase ignored them. He cleaned the mud from Coal Dust's hooves, laid down fresh straw, and sat beside him like always. That afternoon, something changed. Coal Dust walked toward him. 3 steps, but those 3 steps fell like thunder in the silence of their world. Chase didn't move. He just smiled, eyes glistening beneath the fading light. The morning chill still lingered over Rock Creek, though sunlight had begun to trickle through the pine-covered hills. Chase sat on the stall's wooden step, hands wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee, eyes following Coal Dust's slow, steady steps as the horse circled the small paddock. Since Lana's arrival, their routine had shifted. Not just because of the gentle therapy sessions she introduced, but because, for the first time in months, Chase no longer felt alone. Coal Dust remained wary, but no longer panicked. Each time Lana reached out, he flinched, but he didn't bolt. And with Chase, he'd even begun lowering his head, allowing the young man to touch the ridge of his scarred muzzle, the one etched deep like it had been burned in with a branding iron. One day, Lana asked, "Do you ever wonder what he went through to end up like this?" Chase hadn't answered right away, but her question stuck like a hook buried deep in his mind. Every time Coal Dust startled at the sound of falling metal or froze at the whistle of wind through the stall cracks, that question came back like a ghost he couldn't shake. That afternoon, an older man appeared outside the fence line. Tall, lean, with gray-streaked hair and a weathered denim jacket. In one hand, he carried a paper bag with cookies and coffee from the Southern bakery. "Chase Landon, right?" The man's voice was rough, but not unkind. Chase set down his shovel, wiped his hands on his shirt, and nodded. "I'm Reed Callahan. Used to run an endurance horse training camp east of here. Heard you've been working with a discarded Mustang?" Chase nodded again, quieter this time. "He's my friend." The man squinted, peering into the stall where Coal Dust stood chewing hay, ears twitching with alertness. "That horse, he used to belong to a trainer I knew. They didn't call him by name, just by number." Reed sighed. "I've been retired for years, but some eyes? You don't forget." Chase stepped closer, his voice low. "Do you know what happened to him?" Reed paused, then said, "Not everything, but I know where you need to go if you want answers. Try Silas Boone's auction yard. He collects throwaways, sends them off to ranches or worse." Chase's jaw tightened. He nodded. "Thank you." Before leaving, Reed placed a hand on Chase's shoulder. "You've got a good heart, son, but you can't mend a soul unless you know where it's torn." 2 days later, Chase drove down a dusty road to an old auction lot on the town's western edge. The sign was peeling, the lot uneven. A few horses stood tied to posts, waiting for judgment. Inside a mildewed office, Silas Boone, late 60s, pot-bellied, voice sharp as a rusted blade, sat behind a desk that looked older than the building itself. "I'm looking for records on a Mustang I bought last month," Chase said plainly. Dark brown, black eyes, scar on the front left leg. Boone raised an eyebrow, dragging on a cigarette. "You actually bought that thing? Thought it croaked by now." "It's alive," Chase said, voice steady. "And I want to know who it used to belong to." Boone rifled through crumpled papers from a metal drawer. "Records like that don't come tidy, son. Nobody logs those throwaways too carefully." "Any scrap of information will do," Chase replied, low but firm. Eventually, Boone pulled out a yellowing slip and handed it over. "That's all I've got. Former owner, Jet Marlowe, had a ranch down south." Chase took the paper, folded it tight. He didn't know what he expected. A confession, maybe. A name to blame for every mark carved into coal dust's skin. The Marlowe ranch lay sunken between brittle fields and broken fences. The gate hung open, no one in sight. The cabin was gray, windows shattered, roof sagging. From inside, an old radio played a sorrowful country tune. Chase knocked. After a moment, a large man with grizzled stubble and broad shoulders opened the door. His eyes were cold, the kind that had looked through 100 horses and remembered none. "You are?" the man asked, voice like dry gravel. "I bought the Mustang you sent to auction," Chase replied, standing firm. Jet Marlowe snorted, raised a beer can and drank deep. Then, glancing at the barren yard behind Chase, he said flatly, "He wasn't strong enough. Failed the third course. No grit. Waste of hay." "So you dumped him?" Chase asked, his voice starting to harden. "Better than shooting him," Jet shrugged. "I didn't kill him. I just made room for a better horse." Chase stared at him, anger boiling just beneath the surface. Before leaving, he asked, "Why not send him somewhere better? Why leave him to be laughed at?" Jet didn't meet his gaze. He simply muttered, "Figured maybe someone else would see what I didn't." A beat. Then the door slammed shut. Driving back through winding, pine-covered roads, Chase gripped the wheel until his knuckles turned white. Jet's hollow words echoed in his mind like a bitter refrain. By dusk, he returned to the farm. But instead of going inside, he walked straight to the stall, where coal dust lay curled in the straw, eyes half-lidded. Chase knelt beside him, reached through the slats, and gently touched his scarred shoulder. "I met him," Chase whispered. "The one who made you fear footsteps." Coal dust twitched an ear but didn't recoil. "You were a warrior once," Chase murmured, "and they broke your wings before you ever learned to fly." His voice cracked, his hand still resting on the bony shoulder. "But from now on, no one touches you unless you say so." The horse didn't respond. But then for the first time he turned, slowly, deliberately, and met Chase's eyes. There was no more fear there. Not just fear. There was recognition. And in that moment, under the fading Wyoming twilight, two shattered souls, one man, one horse, truly saw each other for the first time. The moon crept slowly over Rock Creek, thin and cold as a blade honed by silence. Chase sat on the steps of the horse stall, arms crossed over his coat, eyes fixed on the flickering fire pit outside. Across from him stood Coal Dust, a horse once believed to be broken, now beginning to rise each morning with a little more light in his eyes. But Chase knew the deepest wounds were still buried under muscle and hide, sealed in memories that didn't speak their names. He couldn't sleep. Jet Marlowe's words looped endlessly in his mind like a splinter left in raw wood. "I figured maybe someone else would see what I didn't." Part of Chase wanted to believe that was regret. But the rest of him knew it was laziness, dressed in words meant to sound noble. That night, near midnight, a knock echoed from the wooden gate of the stall. Sharp, firm. Chase jolted upright, grabbing his flashlight and the old multi-tool his father had left behind. No one came to the farm at this hour unless something was wrong. A tall, broad-shouldered man stood outside, hat pulled low, silver-flecked beard catching the beam of Chase's light. He didn't flinch. "Sorry to drop in late," the man said calmly, "but I'm looking for a horse, Mustang. Reddish-brown coat, scar on the front left leg. Someone told me you bought him at Red Bluff." Chase lowered the light a little. "Who are you?" "Name's Caleb Rourke. I used to be an assistant trainer at Enduro Reach, the camp where that horse was pushed past the edge." Silence fell, heavy as snow. Caleb slowly removed his hat. "I'm not here to take him back," he said. "I just want to tell the truth." Chase led him into the stall. Coal Dust didn't panic, but stood tall and stiff, ears pricked forward, every muscle tense like a coiled wire. Caleb didn't move at first, just crouched slightly, voice soft. "Hey there, old friend." The horse backed up a step but didn't flee. Chase rested a hand lightly on Coal Dust's back, a quiet reassurance. Caleb exhaled. "I saw him run once. He was a real competitor, fearless in wind, tireless on the trail. But Jet, he didn't treat horses like partners. To him, they were just tools. And when Coal Dust started showing pain, he didn't stop. He doubled down." Chase's fists clenched. "I met him. I know what he is." Caleb nodded slowly. "But you don't know it all. That horse nearly died at Granite Hills. Hip tendon tear, chest scraped raw from a crash during a rainy run. I begged Jet to pull him, told him the horse needed time. But he said if the animal couldn't finish, it had no value." He paused. "I didn't have the guts to pull the reins from his hands." Chase stood silent for a long moment. Then, "Why now? Why come looking for him?" Caleb met his gaze. "Because I heard stories about some crazy young farrier doing what no one else would. I had to see it for myself." Chase looked at Coal Dust, then back to the man. "You're late, but if you really want to help, then it has to be on my terms." Caleb raised an eyebrow. "What terms?" "No forcing, no fear, no past dragging into the present. Here, the horse comes first, no one else." Caleb smiled faintly. "Sounds fair to me." The next morning, Caleb returned with a canvas bag filled with soft rope, padded wraps, and a worn leather crop with its tip frayed. "I don't use this to strike," he said, catching Chase's wary glance. "It's just a signal. I won't touch him unless I have to." He began with simple groundwork, lunging circles, no saddle, no bridle, just body language, breath, eye contact. He didn't speak commands, he showed them, through posture and movement. At first, Coal Dust was taut as wire, but gradually, step by step, he loosened. Not completely, but enough for Chase to see it. The horse was beginning to remember another version of himself. Lana showed up on the third day of training. She stood at the fence quietly, watching Coal Dust circle under Caleb's subtle guidance. "I can't believe this," she whispered, not in doubt, but in awe. Chase nodded. "I'm not even sure what I'm watching anymore." After the session, Caleb patted Coal Dust's side and murmured, "Good job, old man." Chase stepped closer. "He's starting to remember. But is that a good thing?" Caleb looked at him. "Depends what he remembers. If you give him better memories, the old ones won't hold power anymore." That night, after things had quieted, Chase sat by the fire. Lana brought cornbread and 2 bottles of cider. "Caleb seems genuine," she said. "Yeah," Chase answered, taking a small bite. "Do you trust him?" Chase stared off for a moment, then replied, "I trust Coal Dust, and if he can stand beside Caleb, then maybe I should listen too." That weekend, Caleb made a suggestion that left Chase speechless. "He needs to return to the track." Chase's eyes narrowed. "You're out of your mind. Not to race, not to win, to face it. You've seen how he flinches at wind whistling through the stall. That's memory, and the only way to rewrite memory is with something new." Chase didn't answer, but deep down, he knew Caleb was right. Coal Dust had to face the place that broke him, and Chase needed to find out if the trust they'd built could carry them through a second storm. The private racetrack Caleb had mentioned lay nearly 30 miles south of Rock Creek, tucked behind rolling hills and silent, time-worn pines. It once belonged to a local racing team, but since its owner passed away, it had fallen into disrepair, overgrown with weeds, boards sagging, shadows stretching long across the empty grounds. And that made it the perfect place for what needed to happen. No crowds, no pressure. Just wind, dust, and the echoes Coal Dust had to confront. Chase didn't sleep that night. He wasn't sure what scared him more. The fear that Coal Dust might fall apart again, or the deeper fear that if he did, Chase wouldn't have the strength to piece him back together. At 3 a.m., Chase rose, pulled on his jacket, brewed black coffee, and stepped outside. The moon had already dipped below the ridgeline. The sky was dark and quiet, but the light from the stable cast a soft glow. And in that light, he saw Coal Dust standing still, head turned toward the distant hills, as if he knew what was coming. "We're not doing this unless you're ready," Chase whispered. The horse blinked slowly. He didn't step back. He didn't move forward, just stood. That morning, when Caleb and Lana arrived, Chase had already loaded the trailer. He didn't use a halter or blinders, just a loose lead gently looped at the cheek. Coal Dust climbed into the trailer without hesitation. But Chase knew. Calm didn't mean comfort. It meant trust. One more silent step forward. The drive took nearly an hour, winding over pothole-ridden roads, across wooden bridges, past forgotten barns. Lana sat in the passenger seat, fingers tightly interlaced, knuckles pale. "You know you can still turn around," she said quietly. "No," Chase replied. "If we turn back now, he may never take another step forward." Granite Hills wasn't like the other places. This was no backyard pen or makeshift ring. This was a real racetrack. Grandstands with crumbling paint, loudspeakers mounted on rusting poles, a scorched earth path still remembering hooves and broken promises. Though the public was kept out for today's demonstration, the weight of history hung thick in the air. Caleb was already waiting by the gate, holding a clipboard. His old leather jacket flapped softly in the breeze. "You sure about this?" he asked. "No," Chase answered, "but he seems more sure than I am." When the trailer door dropped, Coal Dust stepped out slowly, no bridle, no whip, just a soft rope draped over his neck like a quiet agreement. Chase led him along the cobbled path to the track's entrance. And then, a sharp screech erupted as the loudspeakers suddenly came alive. A familiar race day anthem, one that once played before every run at Granite Hills, blared across the empty stands. Coal Dust panicked, his eyes went wide, legs buckled, sweat burst from his coat like sudden rain. "No, no, no," Lana murmured, starting toward him. Chase held out a hand. "Let me." He stepped forward slowly, one knee dropping to the ground, his eyes level with the horses. "I know that sound," Chase whispered. "I'm afraid of it too. But that was then. Today, we're not here to win. We're here to finish. On our terms." Coal Dust trembled violently. But he didn't run. Chase stood, took the lead gently, and together they stepped onto the track, where, a decade ago, the horse had collapsed under leather and cruelty. The air was heavy, not from people but memory. Chase walked beside him, one lap, then another. The horse slowed but never stopped. Each step peeled back a layer of fear, of pain, of what used to be. By the third lap, Chase stopped. He let go of the lead, took a step back. "Run if you want, no one's holding you, but if you're ready, you can keep going." Coal Dust stood still, ears twitching, chest rising and falling, and then he moved. One step, then another, then a trot, then a run. Not fast, not graceful like the old days, but it was a run. A run of choice, of freedom, no whip, no fear. Lana wiped tears from her eyes. Caleb muttered something inaudible, staring hard at the track. And Chase, he simply pressed his fists to his chest, holding in a pride that felt too big for his body. When Coal Dust completed his final lap, he turned his head, searching. Chase was there, waiting. He stepped forward and ran a hand through the coarse mane. "You did it. You're the first to walk out of Granite Hills not with a title, but with your soul intact." That afternoon, they drove back in silence. Not because there was nothing to say, but because everything that mattered had already been felt. On the road home, Lana leaned her head against Chase's shoulder. "I think he understood everything we did." Chase smiled softly. "I'm not sure if you're talking about him or me." Granite Hills. Just the name made Chase's spine tighten. Not because it was where so many horses had lost their futures, but because it was where Coal Dust had lost himself. And now Chase was bringing him back to the very beginning of all those fractures. Morning broke pale. The sky, a washed-out blue like mist, stretched thin. Dry wind stirred brittle tree limbs along the winding road to the racetrack. Chase's old truck crawled up the incline like his own heartbeat, anxious, hopeful, desperate for it to be over, and yet not quite brave enough to wish it had never begun. Lana sat beside him in silence. Her fingers laced tightly until the knuckles turned white. "You still have time to turn around," she said quietly. "No," Chase replied. "If we turn back now, he might never walk forward again." Granite Hills wasn't like any place they'd been before. This was a true stadium. Roofed stands, speaker systems, and electronic scoreboards still ticking. Today's event wasn't a race, but a special reopening demonstration. Still, the pressure hung in the air like a storm ready to break. Caleb was already there, waiting by the paddock gates with a list in one hand and his old leather jacket flapping against the breeze. When he spotted Chase's truck, he stepped up fast. "You sure about this?" "No," Chase said, "but he is." As the trailer door lowered, Coal Dust stepped down, slow and steady, no halter, no blinders. Just a soft rope looped lightly across his neck, more a gesture of trust than control. Chase led him along the gravel path toward the track's tunnel. Then the loudspeakers crackled to life, unexpected, jarring. A race day anthem surged through the air, the same music that had once bled into bone and muscle just before the whip cracked and hooves thundered. Coal dust froze. His eyes widened, his legs folded. Sweat erupted from his coat. "No!" Lana gasped and started toward him. "Wait," Chase said, stepping forward, palm raised. "Let me." He crouched to one knee, eye level with the panicked horse. "I know that sound. I hate it too," he said softly. "But that sound? It's in the past. This is now, and we're here. Not to win, just to end it right." The horse shook, but he didn't run. Chase stood, took a breath, lifted the rope gently, and together they stepped onto the track, where years ago coal dust had crumbled under a different hand and a different kind of silence. The air felt thick, not from people but memory. They walked, one lap, then another. Each step peeled something away. Not scars, but the weight of remembering. On the third lap, Chase stopped, let go of the rope. "Run if you want," he said. "You owe no one a damn thing, but if you're ready, go." Coal dust didn't move. Not at first. Then, a breath, a shift, a step, another. Then he trotted, then he ran. Not the fastest, not the cleanest, but it was running. Running free. Running by choice. Running home. Lana began to cry. Caleb turned his back, swiping a sleeve across his eyes. Chase? He just placed both fists over his heart, trying to hold it together as it threatened to break from something too beautiful to describe. When coal dust finished that final lap, he stopped, looked back, and found Chase. Of course he did. Because Chase was always there, always waiting. He stepped forward, brushed a hand through the thick mane, and whispered, "You did it. You're the first horse to walk out of Granite Hills with no trophies, but with your freedom." That evening, they left the racetrack in quiet. No fanfare, no speeches, but something sacred had taken place, and all of them knew it. On the drive home, Lana rested her head against Chase's shoulder. "I think he understood everything we just did." Chase smiled. "I'm not sure if you're talking about him or me." Night fell. Cold winds swept through the Rock Creek Valley. Chase stood by the fence, watching coal dust rest in his stall, peaceful as a sleeping child. Caleb walked up, carrying 2 steaming mugs of coffee. "This'll spread, you know," Caleb said. "People will come. Reporters, questions." "I didn't do this to be remembered," Chase replied. "No," Caleb said, "but you will be. Not for who you are, but because you chose not to walk away." Chase bowed his head, fingers tightening around the weathered fence rail. "You think he's still afraid?" he asked. Caleb shrugged. "Aren't we all? The question is, do we let that fear keep us from walking forward?" Sunday mornings in Red Bluff always began with the soft toll of church bells, drifting through frost-tipped pines and settling gently into the valley, like a whisper from the land itself. Chase's little farm was as quiet as ever, but today something felt different. Something in the air, a kind of stillness that hummed beneath the ordinary. He rose early, poured himself a cup of strong black coffee, and stood at the window, watching coal dust wander slowly around the paddock. His gait, calm, steady, and free, was everything Chase had once only dreamed of. Lana stepped up behind him, slipping a flannel shirt over his shoulders, still warm from the clothesline. "You gonna tell the kids about coal dust?" she asked. Chase nodded. "They need to know that not all scars mean failure." The Red Bluff Elementary School wasn't big. 3 rows of classrooms, a weathered playground, and a gymnasium built from local pine. But today, the place was packed. Not for a fair, not for a concert, but for something simpler. Miss Owens, the teacher, had invited the town. A man and his horse have a story to share. The kids sat cross-legged in small clusters, eyes wide and restless with curiosity. Chase stepped onto the makeshift stage, just his faded blue shirt, worn boots, and quiet presence. Behind him stood Lana, Caleb, and, true to promise, coal dust, led in gently by one of the students. "His name is Coal Dust," Chase began, voice calm and sure, not like a speaker, but like a big brother telling the story that saved his life. "The first time I saw him, everyone laughed. He was skin and bone, collapsed on an auction floor. But I looked in his eyes, and I saw something I knew too well, what it feels like to be left behind." The room went still. Some kids clutched their friends' hands, some leaned forward, afraid to blink and miss a word. Chase kept going, telling them about the cold nights when the horse wouldn't eat. The morning spent chasing hoof prints into the woods. The The day coal dust looked at him for the first time, the quiet miracle of a broken thing choosing to come closer. After the talk, a small boy named Billy tugged on Chase's sleeve. He looked about 8, messy blonde hair, blue eyes, clutching a notebook with torn corners. "Mr. Chase," he said, voice barely above a whisper, "did coal dust really get left behind?" Chase knelt down and placed a steady hand on his shoulder. "No," he said gently. "He wasn't left. He was just waiting for the right person to show up." Billy didn't say anything, but then he smiled, leaned in, and wrapped his arms around coal dust's neck, whispering something only the horse could hear. No one else knew what he said, but everyone felt it. Something deep had been passed from a soul that had once been shattered to a heart just beginning to believe in hope. In the weeks that followed, the story of Chase and coal dust swept across Wyoming. Local papers ran headlines. A TV crew from Cheyenne shot a short feature. They called coal dust the horse that came back. People began to visit, not just to see the horse, but to touch something they had lost, a reason to believe in good again. One man came in a wheelchair, paralyzed from a motorcycle crash. He stayed by the stall for hours, never saying a word, just watching. Later, Lana said, he used to train show horses. After the accident, he thought he'd never be near one again. But today, he told me, at least I got one thing right. I taught my horses how to forgive. Life didn't go back to normal, but that was okay. Chase and Lana adjusted to the new rhythm. More visitors, more calls, more letters. But they kept their mornings the same, walking coal dust at sunrise, sitting side by the old fence at dusk, trading old stories as the wind wove around them. One golden evening, the sun dipped low, casting Rock Creek in a warm, burning hue. Chase paused in the field, watching coal dust graze quietly nearby. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" The horse lifted his head, took a step forward, and pressed his muzzle gently to Chase's shoulder. A wordless yes. Chase leaned his forehead against the horse's. "And I'd still choose you," he whispered, even if no one else ever understood why. That night, Chase sat in his loft, flipping through his old journal. He stopped at a photo, coal dust at the auction, emaciated, hollow-eyed, knees buckled. Beside it, a new picture. Coal dust now, steady, proud, healed. Beneath the images, Chase wrote, "Faith isn't believing things will be easy. It's deciding not to give up, even when you don't know how the story ends." What do you think truly healed coal dust? Trust, patience, or simply a heart willing to love without expecting anything in return? If you believe that every soul deserves a second chance, leave us a simple comment below. Type 1 if you've ever believed in something that seemed impossible. Type 0 if you've ever let go of something and later wished you hadn't. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories of forgotten horses, wounded hearts, and moments that make the whole world go quiet. There's so much more to tell.